My husband tried to take our children and passports without consent. I called 911, documented the plan, and won emergency custody and safety orders. This is how I stopped the removal and began to rebuild our family. I still wake up sometimes and replay the morning in tiny brittle fragments. The sound of a suitcase rolling across hardwood, the way sunlight skittered off the car when he backed out of the driveway, the glint of the passports in the glove compartment where I never thought to look. It's been 6 months since the day Daniel tried to take Mia and Noah out of our lives, and I'm writing this because people ask me how something like that happens, why I didn't see it, and what you actually do when your life turns into a moment-by-moment emergency. My name is Megan Lawson. I'm 34. My daughter Mia is 7, and my son Noah is 4. We live in a small city outside of Chicago, suburbia that feels safe because everyone's polite and the kids play in yards and there's a bodega on the corner where the guy knows your coffee order. Daniel and I had been married for 9 years. On paper we were the sort of dependable couple people assume lives are built from: steady jobs, mine in non-profit development, his in logistics, a mortgage, a dog that sheds, soccer mornings on Saturdays. Underneath that paper, like many marriages, everything was messier. We loved each other and hurt each other in ways that felt normalized until they weren't. There were red flags, of course. Small ones at first. Daniel getting frustrated when plans changed, snapping more often than he used to, being secretive about his phone. I told myself the usual apologetic scripts: work stress, a tough quarter, a friend's crisis. Then the secrecy got strange: a new bank account he opened for emergencies, an unexplained work trip that lasted a week, social media messages he'd quickly delete when I sat with him. He hadn't been violent toward me in ways that left visible marks, so when the conversations about worry started at family dinners, people treated them like marital drama, not alarm. I don't blame myself for missing things. I want to be clear about that. Hindsight is its own cruel teacher. You don't necessarily see a plan until the plan is trying to move through your life. What I remember in detail is the way his behavior changed in the month before the attempt. He started photographing our passports casually and setting them on the kitchen counter like a man testing whether his mind had permission to reach them. He began researching visas with an intensity that felt more like escape than curiosity. He called a man I'd never heard of who lived in another state more than he called me. He zoomed in on deadlines. We should travel before the new school year, and then dismissed my questions with a cool, practiced impatience that made me feel petty for asking. The morning of the attempt started unremarkably. Mia had to get to school for a spelling bee practice. Noah needed his cereal and his dinosaur socks. Daniel kissed both kids and told Mia he'd take them on a surprise weekend. A line I should have asked more questions about. He'd been suggesting micro-adventures anyway. When he said, "Just pack a bag, we'll be back," I felt something tighten in me that I wrote off as a mother's nagging. I thought a weekend trip might be harmless. I did not think about passports or a suitcase full of money or the word abduct. At 9:15 a.m., as I made coffee, Daniel walked back into the kitchen with 2 backpacks and his leather duffel. He had the passports on the counter, exactly where he'd been photographing them for weeks. He said very calmly, "We're leaving now. I've arranged everything." My first instinct, the one that had nothing to do with law or protection and everything to do with tone and expression, was to ask him where we were going. He smiled like he was offering me a pony. He said, "Somewhere safe. Just trust me." "Trust you," I echoed. The word left my mouth thin. We had fought the night before about money and time and about him being emotionally distant, but nothing that seemed to justify a sudden parental exile. I remember that he reached for Mia's fingers and Noah's hand, and the children's faces were open and trusting. I remember the way Daniel's hands were gentle and practiced. A terrible, intimate cruelty because he hadn't broken anything yet. Without thinking through public procedure, please note, adrenaline makes you act in the only way you can think of at the moment, I asked him to sit down and talk. He laughed. The brittle kind of laugh I now associate with someone who believes a will can be forged in a moment. He said, "We don't have time for a lecture. Get in the car." As a parent, you sometimes argue short-term survival against long-term consequence. I remember very clearly looking at Mia and thinking, "Say no, Mom. Say no in front of them." But the words locked in my throat. Then something small happened that read like a twist in a movie but was pure human. Noah asked for his favorite dinosaur toy, and as Daniel turned to get it, he left the passports briefly on the counter, within reach, not hidden. I grabbed one, the reflex of panic quieting any thought of decorum. It felt like I knew, with an instinct that did not need proof, what the passports meant. They were the legal key to moving across borders. I couldn't allow that key to leave my house with my children. What followed was a sequence of seconds that compressed into minutes. I told Daniel he could not take the kids without a plan we both agreed to. He said I was selfish. He said he loved them and was protecting them. He raised his voice. He told me, in a sentence I will forever hear when the good air in a room goes sour, "If you make this hard, I'll just leave and not come back." It was a threat and an ultimatum and a confession all at once. I called 911. I've replayed that moment 100 times, the breathing in and the steady voice of the dispatcher as she said, "Is anyone hurt?" I told her not yet, explained that my husband was trying to take my children and was leaving, that he had passports and was packing. I didn't know where he planned to go, and if I'm honest, part of me didn't want to see the plan because seeing feels like ownership. The dispatcher asked for the car model and license plate number, and I was able to tell her because I'd memorized it subconsciously. Daniel had always been meticulous about registration. I told the children they were not going anywhere without me. I told Mia to go get her pajamas and sit on the couch. Looking back, the little improvisations you make in emergencies feel clumsy but necessary. Daniel still moved toward the car. He was, in spots, almost methodical. I put myself between the car and him because there are instincts you cannot rationalize. I planted my feet and I told him she was not going to the airport and he could not force this. He shoved me. It was the first physical push that didn't feel like a spat. In that shove I felt both fear and a cold clarity. Someone had to call 911 because social media and anger are no defense in the face of someone who's decided to remove your children. I kept repeating to the dispatcher that he was leaving and the passports were in the glove compartment. What saved us, and I'll be blunt about the luck and the law and the kindness of people who decided to show up, was that a neighbor saw the commotion. Mrs. Patel from across the street is the sort of small-town ally you don't appreciate until you need one. She waved down the cruiser and stayed outside on her porch, shaking her head, calling for me to breathe and to keep the kids inside. 2 police cars arrived within 7 minutes and blocked the street. I don't know if Daniel would have gotten through without them. I'm immensely grateful to officers who, without moralizing, separated us and told him he could not remove the children from the jurisdiction. He argued. He said he had rights and that he loved them, but there are limits to rights when a parent attempts unilateral removal without consent or court orders. The officers made a call to a family court intake and told us we needed protective steps. We spent that day with officers taking statements. Mia and Noah were bewildered and then sleepy. Daniel was taken to a holding cell for a few hours. The officers cited intent and the risk of removal. The legal term I later learned is custodial interference or attempted parental abduction, depending on state statutes. He was released on condition of no contact with the children and with a watchful admonition. I don't underestimate how complicated things looked. He had not physically taken the kids across a border, but the attempt to do so with passports and the concealment of plans was enough to make the authorities act. What happened next was a blur of legal appointments and forms and practical measures that feel unromantic and awkward. I called my lawyer and filed for an emergency ex parte custody order that immediately prohibited Daniel from removing the children from the county or from taking any steps to obtain passports or travel documentation without my consent. I called the kids' school and asked that no one release them to Daniel. I changed locks. I turned off location sharing on devices and quietly asked friends to be vigilant. I slept 3 hours that first night and then woke at 3 a.m. and checked the children's breaths like a person watching for a storm. The community response was complicated. Some family members rallied to Daniel's narrative of needing a fresh start, which felt like gaslighting in a very public forum. Some neighbors offered casseroles and took Mia to soccer practice so I could meet with the lawyer. Online, where private things go public quickly, people formed opinions that were messy and unhelpful. The thing that surprised me was how many people had a story of someone getting up and leaving and how their first sympathy often went to the person who left. Our culture has a strange grace for dramatic exits. It is less generous to people who stay and breathe through the hard work of patching what's broken. Therapy is not optional in moments like this. All 3 of us began seeing professionals. Me, for trauma and decision-making under pressure. The kids, for the first time, with a child therapist who specialized in attachment and safety. And even Daniel, who eventually enrolled in anger management and a therapy mandate tied to custody court hearings. The children were frightened and then numb. They'd ask strange things like, "Did Daddy take me?" And, "Was that a bad dream?" Their questions made me crumble, and then it made me act. Legally, the case went slow but tangible. Criminal prosecutors reviewed the precinct's notes and ultimately filed charges of attempted custodial interference. In family court, the judge issued a temporary custody order granting me primary physical custody with supervised visitation for Daniel while he complied with risk and rehab requirements. The order explicitly forbade international travel and the use of children's documents without written consent. Those documents, the orders and the restraining language, felt like both armor and warning. They were not romance. They were legal scaffolding that kept my children physically close. I won't pretend the aftermath is neat. Daniel contested some of the orders. We had ugly hearings where he painted himself as a lost man who needed second chances, and where I sat and told the cold, boring truth. That the decision to attempt removal without consent is a fundamental breach of trust that has safety consequences for children. Family court judges make decisions based on risk and child welfare, not on who had the best apology. Over months, supervised visits became longer as Daniel met requirements, demonstrated stability, and accepted the terms that had been set. Therapy, a stable job, GPS monitoring of his checked-in locations during visit times. All of this is tedious and humane. It asks a person to prove they are safe rather than just claim it. Practically, our life recalibrated. We installed extra locks. We put a copy of the custody order in the kids' school file and in the hands of close friends. Mia's teacher received a note and a photograph of me so she would never be released to Daniel without consent. Noah, at 4, learned to say "mommy call" when he felt unsure. I trained myself to watch for small signs, a friend asking about a new adventure, Daniel suddenly offering to book trips, and to ask enough questions that his behavior could not hide in the shape of good deeds. Emotionally, it was slow and messy. The kids had nightmares for months. Mia was nervous when a man in a parking lot bent down to tie her shoe because the world now sometimes felt sharp. I had waves of grief for the marriage. I'd thought I had, and for the illusion that love always means caring for each other in predictable ways. There was fear that lingered, the kind that gets under the skin and shows up when you hear suitcases rolling in the street. Therapy taught me to label that fear and not let it run decisions. I learned to be both protective and patient with myself. There are things I learned concretely and urgently that I want to share for anyone reading this who is waking up to the possibility that the person they love could make a choice that endangers children. Trust your instincts. If you feel like something is off with passports, money, or sudden plans, document it. Keep copies of legal documents and take photos of passports and documents if you think they might be used. Tell a trusted neighbor or friend the plan if you suspect something. Safety in witnesses matters. Call police early. They can issue protective advice even before anything happens. And if you're in immediate danger, call emergency services first. If you're in the United States and need support for domestic violence or safety planning, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233 or text START to 88788 for confidential help. I also learned that telling the story helps. After the attempt, I connected with a local support group of parents who'd been through custody crises. They taught me how to testify, how to set boundaries, and how to help the kids rebuild trust without demonizing the absent parent. A subtle, difficult line. The kids are allowed to love both their parents. The law is concerned with safety and welfare, which sometimes means imposing conditions on contact. Holding both truths was hard but necessary. 6 months later, where are we? We are cautiously better. Mia is starting to sleep through the night more often. Noah is obsessed with making safety boxes out of shoeboxes and wants to keep one in his closet because it makes him feel like a superhero. A plain, childlike solution to fear. Daniel has supervised visits and still works on himself. The criminal case is pending, because courts are slow and the legal system grinds forward with the weight of precedent and paperwork. I do not know what the end will look like. I know only what I do. I read the kids a story every night. I go to therapy. I made friends with the woman who lives a few houses down and who now watches the kids on holidays if my schedule is tight. I made a life of small, consistent protections. If you are reading this because you fear the same thing could happen to you, I want to be blunt and compassionate at the same time. Safety is not drama, it is logistics. It is calling a lawyer, filing forms, telling the school, changing locks, and doing the boring, mundane stuff that keeps your children physically close. It is also feeling your heart break into pieces and giving yourself the space to heal even as you act. The suitcase that rolled across my hardwood that day is still heavy in my dreams. But it no longer has the same sharp power. I keep the children's passports in a fireproof box in a locked closet now, accessible to me and to no one else without process. I am realistic. People change, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. I am careful. I am also trying to remember that love, real brave love, is not leaving. It is showing up, imperfect and steady, for the long, ordinary work of rebuilding trust, or of choosing safety when rebuilding isn't possible. If this post helps one person take a call, make one appointment, or tell one neighbor, then it's worth the weight of telling. We survive these things not by grand gestures but by small, persistent acts of care. The kind that might mean walking a child to school on a rainy morning or holding a court order in a binder and feeling a measure of hard-won safety.